So David Simon, the creator of such shows as Homicide and Treme and The Deuce, and of course The Wire, has teamed up with Ronaldo Marcus Green, who's the director of Monsters and Men, and has put together this six-part miniseries called We Own This City. And I'm going to give you my thoughts and reactions to part one right after the jump. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, share, subscribe to the channel, ring that bell below, leave a comment. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. David Simon loves him some Baltimore, doesn't he? Like with The Wire, this Baltimore was sort of acted as a character in itself. And so we're going back to that world now, but albeit with a little bit more realism. And The Wire felt pretty real, but reality is set in because we're using sort of the Freddie Gray um, murder as sort of the backdrop of what happens here. This series is about the rise and fall of the Baltimore police gun trace trafficking team, and how they use rise and corruption to kind of get to where they are. It is based on a book of the same name from an investigative journalist called Justin Fenton, and is written by David Simon but directed by Ronaldo Marcus Green. Part one is out, six-part series, and a lot of times with David Simon stuff, it's hard sometimes to get a footing immediately because he throws characters upon characters upon characters at you, and it's hard to sort of get a footing as to whom you're supposed to follow, who you're supposed to kind of be behind, who's the protagonist. You don't really get that. It's even harder to get that here when you're looking at crooked cops. None of them are good, and there's a little bit of it that they kind of blend together because, I'm not gonna be lying, generic white man, generic white man, generic white man. So it's very difficult sometimes to sort of place them. So ride with me a little bit as I try to kind of place what this first episode is kind of doing. There are basically four stories being told here, and it's not linear. So that's why it gets a little bit even more dicier. Is that we start this episode off with Jon Bernthal, who is Mr. Punisher. Mr. Shane is doing it again. He's really good. He plays a sergeant called Sergeant Jenkins, who you can tell from the moment he hits on screen he doesn't think his shit stinks. He is giving a lecture to a bunch of what it feels like cadets or first time officers, and he's just basically telling them the lays of the land. Like, don't use brutality, even though it kind of gets off that he does. But it is basically showing you his bravado and that he doesn't think anything that he does is ever going to get him in trouble. He has a couple of lines that says, like, no matter what you're doing in the streets, by the time you get to the courts, your word is what's going to prevail. And it's like any cop that's good is going to be able to write himself out of a situation. Meaning in the reports and whatnot, he'll be able to fix it enough, doctor it up enough, pepper it up enough that your word is going to be what trumps everything else. He walks with a swagger. He thinks he's the cool. He feels confident about everything that he does. So you get this long speech of him kind of pontificating about the rules and rights of what a police officer can get away with. But then you also see that he terrorizes black people. We get a long montage of just how police dehumanize and try to emasculate people of color at all walks of life. It's interesting because I don't think it's very hard hitting. It's very not subtle, but I don't think that's the point of this episode. I think this show is trying to tell you that this stuff happens, and it's like, look, this is what it is. It's not sugarcoating it or hiding it. It's not gonna like dress it up a little bit. It's like, I'm gonna hit you with what exactly is going on, and you deal with it. So there's no subtlety that is happening here. You see people just being randomly harassed, just stared at, just treated as less than, people being yanked out of their car with their kids there, being emasculated in front of folks. That is just the way that it is. Jenkins 100% thinks that he is doing the Lord's work and is the best man doing it. And so you get these time jumps that happen, and the way you sort of get the placard to tell you at the time jumps, you see reports or subpoenas or warrants being written with a date, sort of telling you what date it is. And so we jump from 2015 to 2017 in this episode quite a bit. You go back and forth, and it's a little jarring. I feel like we're actually going to go even further back in the way that the series is going, because it is basically telling you how all of this started. And we in this episode bookend with Jenkins giving his speech, feeling like he's the greatest person in the room, to a coda at the end of it where, spoilers if you haven't watched this episode yet, but Jenkins is caught. The FBI finally raids him and has him arrested. And the look of just pure shock on his face, because he's going in there, he doesn't even see, he's blindsided. He doesn't even see it's coming. He's walking in, they give him a note saying, hey, IAD wants to see you for blah, blah, blah. He walks in, he's saying hi to everybody. They are all giving him this look of like, you don't know what you're walking into. He is so self-sure, so cocky, that he's kind of like, cool, like, hey, how's it going? Gets around that corner, they hem him up. And they arrest him. The police chief comes in and looks at him, and he has a moment where he looks at him, and Jenkins looks him dead in the eye. Whereas all the other people who own that task force that apparently were arrested looked away. And he didn't. Because for him, he still doesn't understand what's going on. And so the episode ends with him being, do you know who I am? Kind of like, what are you doing? Like, I am above all of this. And it just shows you how deep, over the years that he's been in this, how deep his roots go. I think that's kind of what we're going to do over the next few episodes, kind of go back and see how he got to this point and how he feels so self-assuredness in what it is that he's doing. Meanwhile, there are like 3 other stories sort of play in this episode. There are some overdoses that take place in sort of a suburb. This is where it always starts when you get into the suburb, and white people start dying, people start questioning. But you have some overdoses that happen in the suburbs of Baltimore, in Bel Air, Baltimore, which I didn't even know was a thing. And there are 2 cops, McDougal and Hawk, who are on that case. And they follow the breadcrumbs and kind of lead to a partnership with another task force. That task force, together, they get a hit on a young man named Anderson, who is just kind of sloppy with what he's doing. And in his sloppiness, he leads them directly to his stash house. Technically, he has 2 stash houses. And so they get a warrant for a search and seizure for both places at the same time. Fortunately for them, his main stash house was hit the day before by another task force who seems to be less on the up and up. And what McDougal and Hawk learn is that there are 2 trackers on Anderson. Like, one that they put, because they go to try to recollect it, because those things are expensive, and they collect a second one, and they're like, who does this belong to? And they find out that it's to a task force that may not be on the up and up, may not have all their dots dotted and their T's crossed to kind of actually have this seizure. And so they hold on to it, and that's sort of the breadcrumb that is the seeding, because this happens in the past. Stick with me, this happens in the past. That is sort of the seeding that happens 2 years later that starts the bust on the task force that comes to what it is. And so it's clear that in those 2 years, that entire case is being built up, because what happens is he's like, hey, I'm going to hold on to this tracker, but I'm not going to call the feds. And that sort of is what kind of seems like it's going to start the process to get that ball rolling, so that by the time it gets to where this episode ends, that's how they have all that information collected to make a stop. The other 2 stories that are part of this episode sort of are intertwined. There is, and I guess the closest you're going to get to a protagonist in this episode, but it's kind of hard. There's a young woman named Nicole, who is an attorney, who is just now moving to Baltimore. And she's been in New Orleans, she's been in a lot of the trouble spots of the world, and she's coming to Baltimore because the mayor has sort of put this decree to kind of clean up Baltimore in the wake of Freddie Gray. And it's amazing, on her first day there, she stops where a police stop has happened. She starts recording it, and everybody has their phones. That's how the world is right now. Everybody has their phones. That's what we've become. And the police officers just stop the arrest. They're like, look, this isn't worth it. I'm going to leave. And that's kind of what's been happening since the Freddie Gray thing. She gets to the mayor, who was like, I'm not coming back. I'm not rerunning. And she's like, wait, what? So the mayor that has started this decree is not going to be here to see it get cleaned up. But the police have stopped policing because they are afraid of doing their job. They're afraid that they maybe get caught or get put into wrapped up in brutality. They don't want any parts of that, so they're just choosing screw it. You guys police yourselves. I'm not doing anything about this. So crime has gone up, where arrests have gone down, and so now it's just become this sort of lawless land, and you still have these crooked cops that are sort of doing their own thing in the middle because they can kind of game. He feels like he can game the system. Nicole is doing everything humanly possible to sort of go to commissioners and mayors and whatnot to sort of find out why there are certain rules being put into place where a couple of crooked cops get to keep being a cop. And the name that keeps popping up all the time whenever she goes to speak to somebody is Herschel. That name is first before she even gets it out. She's like, "Yeah, what about this person? Or what about these names?" Like, I keep hearing a name. They're like, "Oh, Herschel." I keep hearing a name. "Oh, you mean I do Herschel?" Like, what the hell? Everybody knows this dude. Why is he still in the street? Because once again, white dude knows how to game the system, and he's about as racist as they come. Like, he's almost a stereotype how bad he is. But that's not to say that these folks like this do exist. So then we see Daniel Herschel. We see him, and he is the quintessential white racist thug with a badge. He lives in intimidation, and we sort of see two scenes with him. I don't know if necessarily both of them are necessary because you kind of get the point of who he is as a person. But one, he tries to emasculate a father in front of his son. He didn't stop at a four-way cross at a stop sign. Basically, he didn't stop, even though he says he did. The officer says he did not. Father does give a little bit of back talk, but he feels like why are you stopping me? You know this isn't. And because of that back talk, I think he was going to do it anyway. But because of that, leads to this thing where he just emasculates. He takes his wallet. He's like, "Yo, give me your ID." And starts throwing his cards up and ground. He has nothing to arrest him on, so he lets him go. But he gives him a warning. He winks at his kid, and he just has him pick up his own stuff, which is just very disrespectful. Second time, he has a frisk with another black officer, where they're checking out the car. They got nothing, but he makes something because he physically attacks the man, and the man and then claims, "Oh God, he hit an officer," and he bashes in the back of the head. He's bleeding. The black officer's like, "I'm no longer calling a squad car. I'm calling an ambo." And my man's like, "Why? He's gonna be fine. It's just a flesh. It's just a wound. He ain't no big deal." It's clear that his power and what he's done, and the stuff that Nicole has found out, is that he always finds a way to kind of get out of it. Whereas there's been one person that the new commissioner who's just been put into power, the new police chief has just been put into power. There was one guy within what he could do who had like a bunch of stipulations that once 5 times hit, he can go ahead and get rid of them. But Herschel just keeps getting by. He doesn't have enough to kind of get him off the road. He just keeps knowing what to do, and just enough that he always gets off. And so those are kind of the Nicole piece, the Herschel piece, which sort of are one and the same. They come together. The McDougal and Hawk team, that is kind of going to be the ones that start the impetus to bring down the Jenkins team, played by Jon Bernthal. And those are sort of all the characters. And I'm sure there's going to be more because I feel like we're going to go further in time to kind of learn who Jenkins was kind of before all of this. There's a brief interaction with Wire Vet and Suter, who's a homicide detective, who's probably gonna, like, you don't bring him up and bring him in and have that little one-to-one with Jenkins if something isn't gonna come of that. So it's clear this is going to branch out more and more into kind of like affecting other people, but that's sort of the jump off point is those four. So the Nicole story, the Hawk and McDougal, Herschel and Jenkins. And so the tableau is sort of being laid out here. We're going to just watch the rise and fall. We've seen sort of where he was at his height, how he felt he can make this bus and kind of know his shit don't stink. Jenkins being the heat, and then seeing him being captured. And now I think we're going to watch how all of this sort of plays a part into this new world. it's fascinating that we get to keep going back to Baltimore. It's a little bit more harrowing and hard hitting this time because you have the Freddie Gray stuff being sort of as the backdrop. It sort of feels more real. But so far, a solid base hit for the first episode. I think for me, watching Jon Bernthal is the best part of this so far. His character and what he's doing is I can't take my eyes off it. I'm angry at it. I hate it, but it's also fascinating to watch. The rest of the characters may pick up as it goes along. Right now, I'm not really attached to anything too much, but I think once it all plays out, it'll look better as a tableau once you have all the pieces, as opposed to sort of like how The Wire was. Like once you and The Deuce, first couple episodes are hard because you're laying the groundwork for all these players. The only issue is here we're only getting 6 parts, so I think they need to kind of get into it a little bit more so I can get a clearer picture of this painting. And I feel like this might be one of the harder things for folks to get into because that timeline jumping can be disorienting. I almost wish, and it would be a cheaper trick, but I almost wish that they would play with color scale to differentiate the timelines more. But that's just me nitpicking. What did you guys think about the first episode of We Own This City, Part 1? Go leave your thoughts and comments in the comments below. If you haven't already, go follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast with the same name that's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that plays podcasts, we're there. And like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.